Hi, and welcome to the Silo Solving Podcast. I am your host, Danelle Marqui Brown, and you can call me Day for short. And I'm excited to welcome to you my two guests for this episode. This episode is going to be a little bit different than others because these two particular guests know each other. And not only do they know each other quite well. And so not only are they partners in business, as leaders, they're partners in marriage, they're partners in parenthood, and they're honestly just two of my favorite human beings in the world. And after this podcast episode, I'm sure you'll understand why. So I want to introduce you to May Lindstrom and Robert Metcalf of Lindstrom Skin. Hi, May and Robert.
Thank you so much, Danelle. It's so lovely to be here with you.
And it's lovely.
As I say, it's an honor to be here today.
Thank you. So you two, obviously, like I said, you know each other, but many in the audience may not know you. So I'm gonna read a little blurb bio on the both of you and give a little context to May Lindstrom Skin. So I'm gonna look at my podcast notes for that. So May is the founder and CEO of the iconic luxury skincare brand May Lindstrom Skin. Since its official launch in 2012, May Lindstrom Skin has been featured in Vogue, W, Bazaar magazine, the New York Times, Goop, Town and Country. The company's been in a lot of publications, but the most special and just really unique and valued publications and praise for the company comes from their customers. Just look at their Instagram feed and you can see it. The company creates a high efficacy clean skincare using the world's finest natural ingredients, and it's made by hand in small batches in their Los Angeles-based manufacturing studio. May is the head skin chef and AKA formulator of the skin collection. And as I said, welcome to the podcast, May. And so I'm going to introduce you to Robert officially. So Robert is the Chief Operating Officer of May Lindstrom Skin, where his day-to-day functions include finance, legal, HR, engineering, and most internal-facing problem solving. He is also the founder of Take Back the Grid, which develops and finances solar projects for schools, churches, other nonprofits, and mid-sized commercial properties. And as a mechanical engineer with multiple patent awards, Roberts is a systems thinker and a creator who thrives on simplifying the complex, which we know in sustainability and systems thinking is crucial. And another thing that he thrives on and is helping people. So, like I said, welcome both to the podcast. Okay, so I wanted to do. I like to make a play on puns and I think that it's important to start any conversation, regardless if you already know someone. But even if you don't know someone, it's helpful to do icebreaker. And so since you two work with each other and know each other very well, icebreakers is a little bit challenging. So it's trying to be a bit abstract on what I've coined as my pun is called a silo breaker, like a play on an icebreaker. So before we dive down into the conversation at hand, I'm going to do that. But first, I also too want to contextualize the purpose for this episode, the theme that we're going to focus on. And so I had mentioned to you, and the three of us, we never really had in-depth conversations on the financial industry term of ESG, because ESG, for the most part, is a case of initialism, which stands for environment, social, and governance, that is used in the vocabulary of a lot of public companies with investors. And as May Lindstrom Skin, obviously, you have no external investors, so it's just a different realm. But ESG is, whether we're talking about private companies, public companies, small companies, large companies, the core tenets of ESG really means something important. Okay, I'm going to pose a question for us to reflect upon for the theme of this episode. So, purpose-driven or ESG investing reporting is a topic of aspiration in mainstream, and there's arguments from both sides. But versus getting all caught up in the arguments of what acronym mean, or this trend in green or eco mean, I want to try to like cultivate conversations to make these topics more digestible and not so focused on what is E, what is S, what is G, as if it's like picking and choosing alphabet soup. So I think that you two are like a great pairing to explore this because of both you being problem solvers and formulators. So the theme of this episode is E+S+G equals formulating sustainable business. So to start off this conversation and the icebreaker or silo breaker that I wanted to do, trying to bring something like perhaps you have, the both of you have read this book. I don't know if you have, but what I'm going to do is read a brief passage from this book called Empathy, A History. And after I read the passage, if you can both just like riff off of what comes to mind when you hear what I'm about to read. Okay. So Empathy, just like for transparency, is written by Professor Susan Lanzoni. And for everyone's context, this book was actually published in 2018, several years after you two established your company. So as many understand it today, empathy is our capacity to grasp and understand the mental and emotional lives of others. It is variably deemed a trained skill, a talent, or an inborn ability, and accorded to a psychological and moral nature. And it goes on to say that cultural critic Jeremy Rifkin professed in 2009 that empathy is a social value that will remake our businesses, our neighborhoods, even our biosphere. And later it goes on to say that it is more important to have a caring boss and emotionally satisfying office exchanges with material gain. And now there's arguments throughout this. So this is a book, like a history of science book on emotions and empathy, and it's not so much a business. And there's arguments that societies, particularly in America, empathy has, some people are more empathetic and some are less. So the main point, though, is that there is this awareness of empathy's role in business. And so with that, can you riff on thoughts on what that brings up for you both?
Well, I was just thinking about empathy and how it's impacted my work. And it's funny because you said not to get hung up on the acronym and talking about this subject. So I really just stayed with empathy and where that fell in my body and how that's shaped our company over the years. It's been empathy for myself, tuning into what my needs are and noticing that my needs are the needs of those around me. And that tends to be who I pull in, my vibration is what attracts the vibrations of those around me. And when I started formulating decades ago, I would meet people who had skin like mine, with rashes, with blisters, with sensitivity, with pain. People who, like me, were scared of touch, of being touched, of their own touch, of their existence in their bodies, a lot of disassociation. And so much of our foundation came from that place where I really leaned into that deeper relationship to the skin and the humanness underneath it. And in the years since then, that has just evolved so much. I started working on Lindstrom Skin as a concept in 2008, just right around when we met, or a few years, I think, after we met, Danelle.
Yeah.
In 2004, 2005. And so these were common themes that were happening between us. But for me, that moved over time. Eventually, my skin issues were not the most acute piece. And as my skin became more settled and I found these formulas that were helping to heal myself and those who were coming into my orbit and finding me in this work, I started to untangle different knots. And those were more about sensory, more about self-worth, more about the connection inside and less about what was showing up on the outside. And in those years, I think our audience has shifted and changed with us. And so I don't know where that comes into empathy, except that when I feel into my heart space, that's what the sensation feels like to me. It's this heart-led, when I am most fully tuned into myself and giving myself this care, I have the empathy for those around me. I can see them because I've seen me.
Yeah, thanks for that, May. That's different than what I came up with. And yeah, empathy is like a really powerful, feeling and skill, or it's a skill to develop. And and I'd say that I developed most of mine in the last decade, or probably thought about it so clearly that way. And yeah, I think it's fundamental in trying to change anything, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. Really, if we do almost anything, but certainly anything in the ESG world, because I don't know, I see this for change to be effective. I think probably in my 20s, or when I was, I'm probably a more egotistical kind of, probably not really thinking about other people quite as much. I could just imagine futures that were better than how we operate, right? Technologically, environmentally, all sorts of things. I can say, oh, this is just a superior system that should be what exists now. And so there's this revolutionary idea, right, that you just burn it all down and you build the new thing in its place. But well, that's really destructive, right? And like not particularly generative. And like big dislocations like that, well, we've been experiencing some of them, and they're like really destabilizing, and they're not necessarily a part of the change that we seek. And so when I think about change, empathy is the first step. You have to empathize with who you might want to be changing, or yourself, or and then there's enrollment of that person or those people in the change that you might want to seek together. And then you do the change. And so, so to me, empathy is it's foundational in making anything better. I guess you could use it to make things worse too. Right? Changes can go either way, but for the work that we're talking about, the change of improving things, you want people to come along with you. And so if you're not acting with that best interest, or just actually asking them what their best interest is, or at least pretending like you might try to be able to understand it, is just it's just really important. Like I think about that a lot in my solar work. Oh, sorry, I don't know if we're going to go into storytelling time.
This is go with the flow.
But yeah, like I like the solar financing, and my understanding of the solar industry has its roots in probably 12, 13 years ago. I've been interested in that since I was a kid. But in the beginning of 2010, 2011, I helped create the first crowdfunding platform for solar. And and it was an interesting thing because, this was early 2010. It was an internet-based thing. So we were taking people's money on the internet. We couldn't really do that and offer them a return from these solar projects. So it's like, why would anyone even do this? Like they're just going to give us their money. We're going to put solar on this nonprofit, and the nonprofit's going to pay for the energy. We're going to get this money back. Like we can give it to them, but like we just give their money back over a decade. And then, wow, that was like a long time to like let someone borrow your money, right? Or it's just sort of like, okay, like in the bigger culture, like why would anyone do that? And that was sort of the big empathetic question, because if you can't answer that, then you don't have a plausible reason why people are going to engage with you. And so the part that I got excited about, because we were focused on solar, is that, investing with us built the most solar of any way to do it, right? Like you could do a different thing that would save a nonprofit the most money, or create the most jobs, or you could probably replace those ors with ands, right? But the more ands you have, the more complex and the more compromise there is in it, and actually probably gets quite at the root of some of the challenge of ESG improvements is they're engineering solutions applied to human culture, and so they're super fundamentally compromised. but in the good way, right? Like compromise isn't a negative. It's just there are things you can and can't do. You can prioritize and can't prioritize, or resource and not resource. And so when you add all those things together, there's just a sort of pragmatic approach that empathy also allows, because if you can't do everything, you should do the thing that'll hopefully work the best. And empathy makes that way more likely.
In the podcast, like notes for like audience members, I'll like give like a list of other anything that comes up in this podcast, just give you some trinkets to follow up on. But another book that I just want to kind of like reference, this is a book called Purpose and Profit, which is written more so directly to the business audience. And so in a way, like, I don't know, writing a book takes a lot of time. So theoretically, I would love to read a book that combines empathy and purpose and profit, but right now I don't have time for that. So I figured I'd have a conversation with two people who I know operate that way to make that book in a podcast form. And so to carry along on this this journey of like kind of Q&A response of looking at ESG, I want to kind of bring like to for context for listeners and for you, Robert and May. So I'm going to use approximate numbers because the numbers change all the time, but there are when it comes to small businesses, and like the Small Business Administration defines small businesses as 500 employees or less. To me, that sounds still large, but of small businesses, so that's anywhere between 2 employees to 500 employees. There, so the last like estimates were in 2020, I believe, and so the next reporting is not going to happen until this year. But it was something about like 7.6 million like businesses. Like that's a lot of businesses. And when you think about all of the companies on the public stock market, and so that fluctuates too to it's definitely under like 10,000. I think it fluctuates between like 4,500 and like 7K over the years. But when you think about people in the public market and the Fortune 500 compared to like all of those like millions of small businesses, that's like a big distinction. And so often like conversations about ESG and corporate social responsibility gets kind of like put on, oh, you need to be like a big company of thousands and thousands of people. And that kind of creates this narrative that not that that's something for the larger people, larger corporations to do, but it's something that we can all do. And so as small business owners, I guess that's kind of a riff. If you can, I wanted to ask for you to talk through an aspect of your G, the governance of how you don't, your stakeholders being your customers versus investors, and how that shapes what you do as a business, and kind of go into that riff of what governance means to you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's just the quick answer that I have to that is if you have investors, then you just have you have another set of customers. And one of the I think we don't have investors, one, because it keeps our company really straightforward and focused on delivering value to our clients, because they're the source of all the resources in our world. There's also a way of playing small that factors into as well, though. Like May and I are both do-it-yourselfers, and like I've worked for big companies and have a bias against them. Not really actually based on anything. It's just that's my bias. And so I question that all the time, kind of sort of constantly. And so size and your impact are all sort of relative too. I think one of the things that happens in people's minds is they equate small with unresourced and large with resourced. And I think that's actually probably true in a general sense. Obviously, I think in modern times, you can have an incredibly highly leveraged, highly profitable, highly resourced, very small company, right? Instagram had 11 employees when Facebook bought them for $1 billion. So headcount doesn't really tell you a whole lot, other than that you have a lot more humans involved, which actually makes things a lot harder, I think. Or, there's certainly a lot more coordinating. And so you need a lot more resources because, well, there's just a lot more people involved. Yeah, like it's interesting as a privately held company, like there actually aren't really any reporting or communicating requirements about probably anything that we might discuss. And so it's also a curious opportunity for companies like ours that maybe do support certain causes or do certain things. Like, we might have to choose to go talk about them. And I would say that often we don't, because that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because we want to, or we felt like it, or it seems like a good idea. It's aligned with our values. And we're also kind of busy running our company and trying to build it and keep it functioning and providing to our clients and our employees and things like that. And so I have all sorts of visions for the future of how we'll be better in all these ways. And here we are in the present, where those ways have not arrived yet. We have not done them yet or invented them yet because of, again, resources and time. So it's exciting to be 11 years in and have gotten good at some aspects of our company, and then also know that many aspects of them don't even exist yet. And so there's a patience involved in doing it this way that that also matches, I think, the time scale and interests of the group of people that we work with. It's, a relatively small group. It's 25 people. And so we do a lot given that, and we're also tiny. And so I think about both of those things kind of all the time. And so there's lots of places where we can have sort of outsized influence given our size. And then there's other problems that clearly we're just one facet of hopefully a lot of people contributing in the same direction to make things better. But yeah, it's also pretty isolating, I would say. Like, there isn't an inherent opportunity or want for small independent business owners to work together or to talk to each other because of all the same kind of potentially unresourcedness or like busyness, or just like, how do we do all this that they're all kind of facing. And so, yeah, it's pretty isolating too, because there isn't really any context for much stuff other than that there's maybe 7.5 million other companies like us in the United States. But like, what are they doing? How do they do it? We've all just made it up within the sort of legal and regulatory framework that we all have to operate in our countries and our states and cities and such. So it's all quite curious to me how this happens actually on larger scale companies, because it seems much harder to change. If we change something at Lindstrom Skin, I might just have to change my mind, or I might just have to change May's mind, or she changes hers, or it's a small cohort of people that we're trying to like redirect. And I find that I have challenged with that when I'm trying to coordinate 3 people. And so talking about empathy, like, I have a lot of empathy for what it would try to take to change, the orientation of 1 million employees, or let alone 100 or 500 or 1,000, or the scales of all these organizations are very vast, relative, I think, to a human's ability to really comprehend what we're actually talking about.
So true. And May, like, what is I'm sorry, like, I laugh. I'm like, because I'm putting an answer not to project, but I'm going to project this, but then I'm going to say it like go for you. But I'm like, I feel like you govern with your heart and your humanity, but continue on with the riff of like what, without my projection. May, what is your take on like, what is governance in working for, like, having like the customers be your stakeholders versus a board of directors?
Oh, I love it. I think it's best. Really, really simple.
What would be the best?
Yeah, it is what would be the best. And it is what I come back to. I come back to it over and over and over. And I check myself on it constantly. I make decisions around it constantly. It was a large part of why we exited our wholesale business in 2020. The ability to be intimately connected and in direct relationship with our clients is so powerful and so beautiful and so important to who we are. It's foundational. It's absolutely key. And when we come across any kind of question, any kind of challenge, any kind of roadblock, any kind of sticky moment, whether that's inside of myself, I'll say, spinning out about my role within this whole thing, or something bigger. How do we take care of our people on the day-to-day and through collective hardship? The last few years have brought all kinds of interesting curveballs to our plans. And when I reach these intersections, it's so easy if I don't have to wonder what everybody thinks about everything. Because one, I do come back to myself first. I orient from my own want, my own desire, my own seeking of something that I want to exist. And then when I've made that, I am attracting these people who are hungry for what I am feeding. And so when I have my hands out and I say, this is what I have to offer, and our people are here and they say, this is what I want, it's really easy to make a decision in relationship between us. If I had to then take what I know to be true and explain it to somebody who was going to fund this for me, who I was asking for money for, who I was asking for resources for. And well, I take it back to the very beginning. Danelle, you were with me when I first, very, very, very first started talking about turning my little formulas that I would mix in my kitchen and bring to set into people's bathrooms one by one into something that would sit on a shelf. And when I thought about how to package it and how to tell the story and how to invite people in, it really came down to what feels delicious and what feels magical and what feels beautiful and what feels like such a clear yes. And it was easy down to the weight of the paper, to how we printed the gold foil, to the handwritten note that goes out in every order, to all of the little extras and all the little human touches. If I think about our clients receiving this, my whole body gets warm. My whole self fills up with yes. When I think about explaining that to a bank, to a lender, to a room full of dudes who get to say yes or no to my vision, the floor drops out under me and I forget why I'm here. And I have to remember why I'm here, because this work takes all of me. I've poured my whole life into this company that we've built. I stand here with my husband. This is our world. It fills the majority of our conversations and time together. The life that we've chosen is filled with a team who've become our chosen family. Most of our team has been with us for several plus years. These are
I
our
think the average is 5 now.
It's huge. And we've only had teammates since 2014. And so when we have several getting to be a majority that are in the 5, 6, 7, 8 year range, I think about these things and I think about the choices that we make to take care of our people. I think about the entire trajectory of decisions that we make, that I don't have to look over my shoulder and wonder if it's okay to go with what I know. From the sourcing of our ingredients to what it takes to bring them into our studio fresh from this year's harvest, what it means to blend and fill in our own space within our walls with full control over the sourcing, the freshness, the quality, seeing and feeling and smelling and touching the herbs, the spices, the oils, having that made by our people who love them, who are immersed in it every single day and can tell the difference with their noses and with their fingertips between what's a yes and what's a pass. These are the things that I cannot imagine explaining to a room full of investors.
So I'm going to tie in something that you both said with qualities that I feel that you both share in different capacities, and kind of riff on that for a second, still within this kind of in this aspect of governance, but that's part of a point that I want to make, or I think that is important to be mindful of, that if you're talking about ESG, it's not one or the other, and it's sustainability is it's the triple bottom line of like people, planet, and for some it's profit. It's the in business it's profit, but it's holistic. And so even though, as you both said, the company has evolved over the years as a small business, and you are evolving and working on getting better and better, the intention has there's been an intention that's always existed in your DNA, and that's not always the case for many companies. And there's different type of companies. Some companies start out with these with certain core principles and ESG, sustainable values embedded, and some are don't start out that way and have a different challenge to address on how to incorporate that into their way. But one thing that so when you first launched, one of your products was actually called, or it's called the Problem Solver. Like it's literally a product name, and and the story of how why you started to create the products was for um, not to make a profit, it was to solve a problem. And you, Robert, as a problem solver of how to identifying like pain points and what can be improved in like the operations and solving that. And so if you can talk to like the intention of, so there's purpose, but there's also the why. And so if you can talk a little bit about the why and how that in context to growth, and what does growth mean for Lindstrom Skin?
Sure. Or I have a quick like reaction to that. It's us also as a bootstrapper, or yeah, we're bootstrappers. It's been interesting because we have this bias towards small. And I remember May and I having a conversation a pretty long time ago now. It's probably 7 years ago, about how May wanted to know everyone on the team like well. And we've known a lot of these people for a long time, but like, and I've known a lot of our employees for a long time, and I judge myself for the quality or not of my relationship with them. How much do I actually know about them or not? And I wish I knew more about a lot of them, to be honest, because I'm like busy working all the time. And so they worked in a building that I'm in, or with the same email address as mine for a long time, but we don't necessarily get that much time actually talking together. And but that said, like my what's it for of working at the company is to make it so one, we were just self-conscious about growing. Is just a thing that used to be true, and I think there's still parts of it where it's sort of like, oh well, like if it was this successful, would we be okay with that? What would it tell people about us if we were so successful, or whatever? Like it's interesting aspirational goal in the United States, but then it's also it's a funny place around money. And so even just having the resources to like not be worried about resources like feels privileged, feels something that you shouldn't want, though I actually want that for everyone who's trying to do things that are making things better. And so but thinking about growth, a lot of the growth of our company and its solving of problems has been how can actually on the governance front, this is an idea that's become more sort of deeply important to me, is I think it's inappropriate to like have a company where you pay people and then they live in poverty. It just doesn't seem appropriate to create a business that has that as part of its operations, or potentially even as its goal. And so so in my mind, no one at Lindstrom Skin has ever gotten paid enough yet. And so so I don't like that. Actually, that's probably less true now. But in the beginning, like we all started at $15 an hour. That was like how just Lindstrom Skin started, and that was in 2011. So that was like a generous minimum wage at the time, but it wasn't a wage for like anyone that was skilled or knew how to do things or anything like that. So there was just a lot of people sort of coming along for the ride and trusting that it would get better, and it most certainly has it most certainly has. And our internal minimum wage is much higher now. So just thinking through like how to grow so that we actually improve the quality of life of our team, particularly our production and our shipping team, because those are the kind of jobs that honestly most skincare companies don't even have in their company. Like you farm that out to a fulfillment center or to a lab, and then you don't really have to, you just get the product and you hope that and then you just pay for people to send it to people. So having those humans like as a part of our company, as a part of our team, and like thinking about like, oh, did we create good work? Is this a healthy place to be? Is it safe to be here? Is it generative to be here? Is it fun? Are you enjoying your, like just all of that whole experience? And it's like, okay. And so like we've been adding technology and tools and things like that, mostly to make our team's jobs better. But part of it is because in the beginning, like we weren't that good at it. And so it's just a lot harder, not for any clear specific reason, but we'd like get good at it and go, oh, like if we added this tool, or if we redesign this system or this workstation, like we can just be much more efficient. And so over time, like we've had very much the same team for a pretty long time, and their work either just becomes much higher quality over time or much easier, which has just been a really wonderful, I love that, every couple of years I kind of look around, it's like, oh wow, like we're still doing this with pretty much the same size team. And some of it's because, there have been interruptions where we didn't have to make as much stuff for a while, and now we've sort of grown back into that. And so that's just primarily the main lens that I view the growth of our company through, or historically. And I feel like we're moving into a new period now where we're great at keeping the promise made by our brand and by our products. Like our products are fantastic. We're really good at making them. We haven't, like it's just better today than it's ever been. We're fantastic at fulfilling them and sending them to people. And so I have, and then answering people's questions about the product. So I have personally a lot less, I think, personal shame about being proud of what we've built and the quality of the products that we make. And like, I want a lot more humans to experience that, because I get to read our happy clients channel in our Slack, where our customer care team shares the messages that unbidden people send to us for the impact that the generosity of our customer service, which are just business rules, right? Like these aren't special things. Like this is just us being empathetic and being like, okay, if we were a customer and we went into a company and bought this and something didn't work, what would we want to have happen? And then that's just how the rules are at Lindstrom Skin. And so we just get to invent those. And so then it's hopefully a great place for our clients to be. And it's a great sort of set of rules to engage with the world in, because they have, abundance and generosity kind of built into them. It's just hard. It's confusing to me when people have kind of adversarial relationships with their customers. And so I'm always really curious about the systems that build those kind of relationships, because it's probably not on purpose. I guess it could be. There's a cynical way of looking at things where people can just make things harder than they need to be, but it's usually not. It's not on purpose. It's a function of the systems or some choices that company's made. And so I will still judge those companies for making decisions that aren't the ones that I would have made, but I can also empathize with maybe why they have or why they haven't changed this yet. And so I don't know. I try not to be too. I certainly judge myself. I try to be a little less judgmental of other companies, because I realize that like almost none of this is defined. These are all decisions, and a lot of people just kind of follow other people's playbooks, which makes sense. It's a lot of decisions to make otherwise. But it's nice to use your own playbook, because then if things go hard or if they go wrong, you know why you did it to begin with. And so then you get to know if it was worth it for it to have gone hard, or go, like how to fix things becomes more clear. Because if you're just following someone else's playbook, then the easy shortcut is to just blame them.
Well, I think about where we put our resources, and I think about what that says about what we're doing. And there is this, the last few years have been a really great example of that. In 2020, when we closed our wholesale business, we had the opportunity to test out something we were scared to do, which was to go fully independent for the first time in our history. We launched with our first retailer the day that our daughter was born in July of 2012. And we grew quickly from there. And once we said yes to our first retailer, a stream of retailers followed and that continued for several years without interruption. It was a constant influx of attention and energy on our brand. And that was incredibly inspiring and affirming and powerful feeling. It really showed that what we were doing and what we were so focused on, we had such a clear vision, and that it was resonating as strongly as it was huge. It felt incredible. And so to come into 2020 and be in a place where we'd had this incredible retail family for so many years, and we'd seen what that means to be in community and to be visible in that way and to be where people are looking to learn about skin, which felt like a huge deal because the beauty space changed immensely in the 15-year period from when I started thinking about Lindstrom Skin being a thing to today. There really wasn't a green beauty movement. The word clean beauty did not exist. That was not on a single person's lips in 2008. These weren't words that we were using. And so I look at the path over the years of how we grew, and around us, these retailers were born and made little babies of their own and shot out into new retail stores and inspired more stores like them. And I remember talking to some of our first retail partners and imagining what it would look like when our aspirations were the norm. I had this hope that if I made this most beautiful thing, the best possible thing that I could imagine, that it would inspire more like that. And so I was actually seeking my own copycats from the beginning. I remember sitting with one of my retail partners and saying to him, well, if you get your dream, your store will have many doors. He wanted 200 doors in the next 5 years. So he was painting this picture of having this store of his be everywhere and be the standard for what a beauty store would hold. And to not just have a tiny little corner of natural green, clean beauty, but to have that be the standard. This becomes the baseline. This becomes the expectation. We can do better, so why not? When we know better, we can do better. So let's show them the best. And so we were having this conversation about his ideal and my ideal. And I told him, when you get your vision, it's not mine. I don't want to be in your 200 doors. But I know what I wanted to do, and it was, well, what I said was, I won't need to be in your 200 doors, because also when I fast forward into the future, you are going to have that. But also all of the stores are going to be like yours. Right now you are special because you are leading and you are sending out this ripple of like, it can be like this. And I saw that happen. I saw these other stores copy that model, copy that model, copy that model, copy that model, until we have new language, we have new categories, we have an entirely different beauty space than we did 15 years ago. I saw it happen. And on my side with that, I'm there in the same conversation. I was one of the only brands around at that time offering a truly luxurious, sensorial, over-the-top, beautiful experience that was also efficacious and felt good on the skin and was truly transformative in the formula. And then packaged to the nines and shared with so much love and intention and service and care. And I looked at him and I said, but someday I'm going to look around and I will not be the only brand doing this. There will be many, many, many brands doing this, and this will become the standard the same way that natural beauty stores will become just what beauty stores are. It will become inherent in what it is based on quality. And at the time, that seemed like a pretty frivolous vision for both of us. But if you walk down any major city street, the beauty stores are natural beauty stores. The big brands are natural beauty brands. And we're still here all these years in without having taken a single penny from a single investor.
I have this weird thing about dates, and also too, as I'm prepping for all these different like podcast topics, I did realize, so you and I actually, so we met in 2006, when I was doing that, I had like it was an eco-friendly, like there's all these terms. There's been so many terms over the years, but I positioned it as eco-friendly.
All being born in those mid 2000s.
But the thing is, so I remember that, like, so the month before, Elle magazine, it wasn't green, like, exactly as you were saying, like green beauty wasn't a thing. Like it was just green. But when it came to like beauty, like that was part of the reason why like I reached out to you later once I heard what you're doing, because like I was like, no one's doing what like you're doing. Like and but that same year that I found interesting, I didn't realize this till later, that like in 2006 is also the same year that the term ESG actually came about. Yet if you go online or turn on like Bloomberg TV or something like that, it's all you hear as if it just came out like 3 years ago. And when you think about cycles of history and like revolutions of various things, like for instance, like CSR, which stands for like corporate social responsibility, was in like the 1970s. And then 2006, like green, like on the cover of a fashion magazine with not green beauty, green fashion. It was just like, what's green? And just to see that now here we are in 2022, that it has taken this time for there to be a landscape where it is mainstream, where we are having these conversations. And that's the reason why I think that talking these out so that people know that it's not going to happen overnight. And so I guess I just wanted to say like why that I'm excited to be able to have such a conversation with you two as being such like trailblazers in you're both humble, like, but I'm going to try to like bring it down, like being trailblazers for many various reasons, because as you were saying, Robert, especially from the standpoint of like, there's so many small businesses, and you said it could be like isolating. And when you have so many people and you want to do something, if there's not a model or a framework, and you're living in these individual silos, if you will, it can be hard to make change and to innovate. But the more that we find ways to create new communication pathways, inspire each other, have compassion and empathy as we figure it out, is just really, really important.
I think from an empathy standpoint for like larger organizations, because like there's a silo between May and I. We're silos. And so I want to name that, and I'm happy to talk about that a little bit.
And so like
you have siloed, two minds are siloed, just period. And so even as close and coupled as May and I are, like there's siloing for sure. Sometimes on purpose and sometimes to an upsetting degree, because it's sort of like, it would be nice for us to actually be totally synced and coordinated, but we're not, because we're different people.
So on a previous podcast, we're talking about this point of like, when it's ready, you guys can listen. But this notion of silo doesn't, like, there's just with life, like there's nothing is just like exclusionary, like exclusively like binary, like yes or no. Like there's degrees of like polars, and so if sometimes sometimes there's positives of like kind of working in a smaller space, but sometimes you have to go out and expand, and it is like it's a dance of being from the human perspective, I guess you can say, it's being aware of it, and the fact that you're both naming it, that's part of progression, because part of many people's frustrations with silos is people observe the silos happening and that no one's talking about it. So
right.
I guess my question to you is like, if this question has ever been proposed in that way, like what do you think could perhaps be ways to break down silos internally? Because it's a challenge. It's not easy. Like we got to figure this out, and it's a different situation for everyone.
Yeah, that is an interesting question, because we had an intentional silo that I was about to say we. I don't know if it was me or it was actually a we thing, but in the beginning, like part of my job was to silo May from the financial aspects of our decision making. like on purpose, because to me, it was really clear that May was creating something beautiful, and it was art. Like we were making art, and like if art has to perform on a certain sort of financial metric, it kind of isn't art anymore. Definitely stealing from Seth Godin on that, where it's like one of the definitions of art is that it might not work, and like if it has to work, then it can't be art. And so there's this tension in that. And so so as the sort of, when I was wearing my CFO hat, like my job was to like just make sure everything got taken care of, you know. And we weren't a company that was really growing by like adding a bunch of new products or like a bunch of like necessarily like big investment things. And so it wasn't even that I was like that this siloing was limiting necessarily May's creativity or output. The idea was for like financial worry to not like limit her sort of creative output. And so that worked to a degree or not. We won't really necessarily grade it here, but as we sort of grown, it was uncomfortable for me to be the sort of primary or only steward of the finances of our company. And so that silo started to soften, because it was like, I need to talk to someone about this, and May's the person that I'm most likely to talk to about it. And so for a while, or for the last few years, like May's heard more about the finances of the company than she would probably like to hear from me. And so it's also just an opportunity for me to, now I'm realizing it's like, oh, there's other help that I can get on the financial side of things too. And I'm not really like doing it all by myself. But it's just another opportunity for me to realize like, oh, like I want more support. May can be a facet of that. And certainly like the financial health and strength or whatever we're doing with the resources of the company is an important thing for her to be aware of. But at this point, I think it's actually would be limiting to silo May from that kind of question about resources, because like she might have some project in her mind that like she thinks that we can't do. And so she might edit her own thinking or her own sharing of interesting ideas because maybe I didn't have the discipline to be like, this is our budget for X, and just like present it and then go, oh, cool, there's a budget for that. Now I can go be creative in that. Like, that's not a discipline I have yet. And so I just know that that's a scenario where like, because a lot of that information is, let's just say, stuck in me, my team can't benefit from knowing it. And so that's actually a part that I'm trying to unwind out of me, where it's like, okay, you know, that number might seem really expensive compared to, I don't know, what buying something for your home feels like, but purchasing something for our organization, it operates at a totally different budget than maybe a normal person is used to, even though sometimes the numbers we're dealing with are still small. So anyways, it's just contextualizing some of this stuff is at least one of the tactics that I'm using to kind of fully decenter me in some of these things. So centering and siloing almost feel like relatives in that idea, where it's like, oh, if I'm the sole holder of information, like that's not great, right? And so that's like how I tend to think about siloing is if information's getting stuck, or if knowledge is not moving around. And so again, we're small enough where like I can just kind of ask for knowledge and just go work with a team for a day and go, oh, I learned a lot, right? And so so I'm grateful for that, but that's not how it will work in the future or at a different scale. And so so I know that's what we're doing for now. But yeah, the opportunity to actually, and you were doing just even a motion with your hands earlier, where you're moving your finger back and forth, and it just was reminding me of there's this idea of polarity management, when you have two things that are opposites of each other, and it explains like where there's sort of inherent dynamics in some of these things. And so siloing is probably a good example of a pole, or so where there's like low information flow, and then maybe one where there's high information flow. And each of these things will have positives to them and negatives to them. And if they're at true poles, like whatever, the positives of the silo is like, well, we're like really focused on what we're doing and we're getting really good at it, and we're not having to like communicate out to everybody or get a bunch of inputs, because we're like just really doing the thing we're good at. But now you start to become myopic, right? And you start to dip down into the negatives, because you're like, okay, well, the only thinking going on around here is our thinking, and like we're not looking past our interfaces to our other divisions or whatever the like the constraints are. And you start going into the negative part of that silo and that low flow of information. And you don't get to use the positives of the silo to get out of the negatives. You get to use the positives of its opposite. And so you get to use the positives of free information flow to get out of the negatives of that. And so, oh, now we got new ideas. Oh, now we're more inclusive. Now it's more diverse. And now like everything's starting to get better. But like, now there's like too much, right? Like we need to silo again, right? Like it's like, oh, like how do we discern, right? How do we tell what's important to us? And so now you're down into the negatives part, and then it comes back around again. And so there's just these parts as a problem solver, like that's a dynamic that I was really helpful. It was really helpful for me to understand that framing, because we might show up and go, we figured it out. We solved it. Like we have a permanent solution, right? This isn't going to vary in time. And then it does. And it's like, why did it change? Right? Like, but we figured it out. And it's like, oh, because it does this. And it's not necessarily so symmetric, right? Like it might be highly biased towards silo with this tiny little thing. And you're like, oh, that's actually what it feels like. And maybe it would be better if it was more evenly balanced, and like these swings wouldn't be as intense. Or maybe not. Maybe siloing is actually really great, and we just need little inputs of like, hey, did you know they make battery powered airplanes now? And you go, oh, no, I didn't know that. And now you just like get to completely solve something in some new way because like one idea showed up. And so, there's no answer in there, because it's one, a dynamic, and then it's also non-prescriptive, right? Like it would be really great for us to all just be like mastery mindset. It's like, here we're at point A, we want to be at point B, where everything's carbon neutral, and we all have food and shelter, and everything's great. And it's like, but none of us can like know the path between those things. And so it's more, it's less directive than that. And so it doesn't lend itself to like command and control super well. It's more emergent. There's this idea that entrepreneurs are risk takers, and it's like not really. Like our job's to like looking at May knowing May when I met her, and like seeing how people responded to the product that she made. It wasn't risky at all for me to feel very confident that people love that product, because I could just get to watch it and go, oh yeah, like this is beautiful and fantastic. And like I just want to like help make sure that like May lets it keep being beautiful and fantastic instead of something else that it could become if she had to operate out of fear, to be honest. And so it's sort of like, so my job in one way or another is to just sort of make fear reduce as much as possible through our company. And so that's for myself, it's for May, it's for our team, it's for our customers. And so that's just actually another aspect of like the sort of like what would be great is sort of like, are there ways that we can help people be less afraid? And that's just sort of me, like my meta mindfulness sort of idea, because I feel like lots of bad decisions come out of fear. And so if we can just operate from not that, I guess not that's love, or that's just a more clearly generative way. It's like, if we love these people, what would we do? If we love this planet, how would we treat it? And that's probably where some of my impatience comes up. Is like, I know the ways that we don't do a great job. Like I know that the air freight that moves our packages around pollutes, right? And so like I want to figure that part out, or I want to offset that accurately and consistently if that's a thing. And like that's not very clear, or particularly like, there's just all these murky parts of that world. And so there aren't really kind of it's not all just silver bullet stuff. It's all just sort of having it built into the ways you're thinking about things. And so just the way, if you can design it that way from the beginning, like we have glass packaging and paper, and there's ways to make that more sustainable and more recyclable and less wasteful too. Luckily, I'm not having to remove a bunch of plastic from our supply chain, right? I'm not having to remove a bunch of water waste or something in our operations, because we really just use water to wash our dishes. It's like, so like there's just these ways that we can be more intensive or less intensive. I don't know. It's how to have the vision for the future. I just take a lot of inspiration from Patagonia, right? Like they've been in business for way longer, and probably are bigger environmentalists than we are. That's a judgment, but like they've been very pragmatic, right? Or it's like, hey, like we wish that these technologies existed or these materials existed. They don't quite. This part works, so we'll incorporate that. And they've gotten really good at it and good at making profit where they get to use that profit to just invent like the solutions that they're then deploying into the world. And like, that's a dream of mine, is being resourced enough to just be like, this problem right here, we're like going to fundamentally solve. Like, we fundamentally solved, like, you know, May having access to products that support her skin, and us being able to provide those to our clients, which is beautiful. And so anyways, I just started to get curious more now about like, oh, well, if there were things that we wanted to do in a fundamentally different way, like what would they be? Why would we do them? And like, and when are we going to? And so, yeah, like there's lots of projects that in Asana, we have projects to be prioritized, right? The list is long, and there's only a handful of things that like our small crew can handle doing at a time. And so we do them as we can, but they're there waiting for us. And so, yeah, so I just get excited and impatient again about how to make more of those changes a reality sooner.
I hear you.
I also have a plug for another book.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
So Seth Godin helped assemble this thing called the Carbon Almanac, that as a company, like we've bought 300 of, but I haven't personally read or given to anyone. But the idea is that it's like a fact-based, it's an almanac. That's all of the idea is that it's opinion free, and that these are all sort of facts and footnoted, you know, fully researched things about carbon and its impact on our planet, and yeah, and how humans contribute to it and not, and just it's just a bunch of really helpful information. So it's I think as an environmentally aware person and as a leader, I'm actually a little afraid of this book, which is why I bought it, because it's going to highlight to me a bunch of other places where there's room for improvement. And so I'm excited about that, but I'm also like, I hope I'm not too mean to myself for for knowing these additional ways that we are not, where we've missed the mark, or where there's something more for us to be able to do. And so anyways, I don't want to hide from that kind of knowledge either. And so I think it's a very valuable resource.
Thank you. I'm going to definitely list it. And that brought this, hearing you say that, this again, I'm going back to the aspect of empathy, but then also in that description, there's this notion of emotional intelligence, and you had brought up fear, and just knowing that, like with your team of Care Bears and the care, like it connects back to a sense of emotional intelligence, like having, it's hard work to like look at our like reflection and to go inward, but one needs to do that in order to be able to like have empathy, because you have to recognize and have that compassion. And so it's just like just being mindful of the importance of being able to recognize the fear, the joy, the space that someone needs to be creative, to be like, to have the data that they need. Like everyone has different needs, but that's part of a skill set with books, by practice, by very talking. There's various ways to grow the emotional intelligence, but that's just coming to mind as an important factor to discern the various emotions that come to play in all of the business. And ma'am, if there's anything else that you want to say.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd been thinking about was just like the word silo, and where that's showed up in our partnership over the years as we've built and grown this company through its various chapters. And I was thinking about the beginning years. When Robert and I first met, this was an idea that I had, and he was doing other work and I was doing other work. And so we came into relationship together with me focusing on this dream. And it was a handful of years in before Robert became a full-time operator in the company. And so from the beginning, he was always helpful husband. He was always there handling the things that I wasn't handling, taking on the pieces that were his skill set that allowed me to stay in dream state. What he said about keeping me out of fear so that I can stay in dreaming was actually incredibly, incredibly important. I had no model of what this could look like. And so I really did have to dig very deep in myself and stay centered in that feeling, and holding faith in that vision meant something, and having him see that in me was really important. And so those first handful of years, he was a very helpful cheerleader in the background. And about halfway through a number of events, the largest being the pregnancy with our second child, I ended up on bed rest in year 6 of our business. And during that time, well, pre that, Robert had started coming around a lot more in person in the studio in the year prior, because I had stopped nursing and was traveling again and going around the world and training our retail partners. And I was gone a lot more. And the more I would be gone, the more he was present. And so he began to really show up in a physical capacity in the studio, and became integrated with the team that prior to that had really just been me. It was me and 3 women, and then 4 women, and then 5 women. And then somewhere in there, Robert started showing up. And so the dynamics of those early years when he started coming around were complicated. At first, it was really wonderful because there was Robert was getting really sparky about the work that we were doing, and it was fun to see him really sink into it and appreciate it, and claim it for himself as part of his identity, and to really take pride in the taking care of our people. He really took on the taking care of our people. And so that was really exciting. But the nitty-gritty was basic stuff, like team meeting. And there'd be 5 of us, 6 of us, 7 of us, and 2 of us are Robert and I, and we're married, and we're very different people, and we come from different places on all kinds of things. And so I had been used to running team meetings. And when Robert would sit in on them, he'd comment, and sometimes in direct conflict with me. And then he would say something, and I would comment in direct conflict with him. And so we found ourselves hashing things out in front of our team and doing more things live time, which is not my comfort zone. And it was more Robert's comfort zone. And so the dynamics of who's in charge, who's making the calls here, who do we default to? And for a minute, it felt a little bit like arguing in front of your children. And are we going with what mom said? Are we going with what dad said? I'm not really sure, but this feels a little sticky. And so that process was not the most comfortable. And I'd say there was a certain dynamic to that for a couple years that really shifted a lot when, one, I wasn't able to be there anymore because I was either out of town, out of the country, or later on bed rest with our second child. And so when one or the other of us was leading the meeting, all well, both in there together, we had to actually coordinate and communicate in a way that felt good and felt safe for both of us, and was also supportive of our team and clear in the dynamics with them. And that took time. And what was really helpful, or how I've always described it, and it's interesting because I think we're at a different point in this now. And so, I'm curious how this will land. But in the beginning, it was sticky because it was all hands on deck, because the team was so small. We had everyone in there thinking about the same thing at the same time. It made it messy, it made it dynamic, and it was important at the time. I think that our growth as a couple, as leaders, and as a team was amplified and expanded exponentially when we were able to focus on our primary gifts, when we actually intentionally siloed. And we had to get big enough for that to be possible. And so when I came back from bed rest and after the birth of our second child, we led different teams. We took on different orientations, where before it was all of us around one table. It became Robert's back of the house, I'm front of the house. If this was a restaurant analogy, I'm still the chef. These are still my recipes. These are still my formulas. It's still my vision, but I'm not in the back mixing up the soup anymore. I'm out here talking about it. And Robert is in the back, making sure that my standards are upheld, that the quality is maintained and expanded upon, that our people are taken care of. And he got to really put all of his pride and power and concentration into the on-the-ground operations in our team, which gave me a huge amount of freedom to turn the other direction and put all of my effort and care into our audience, our clients, the people who were actually taking these potions home and using them, and really being able to focus on education and inspiration and connection. And it fueled a whole different part of our growth. It also made things more clear for me. What is my purpose now? I solved these formulas decades ago. I'm not trying to come up with a new product every season. I think it's unnecessary. And so in the siloing, I am able to be in my full power. If I am thinking about the logistics of the day-to-day, even as much as staying caught up on all the different Slacks from the different departments and things going on. But certainly if I'm thinking about all of our financials and the dynamics of keeping all of our people fed and insured and taken care of and healthy and thriving, and do they love their jobs too? And maybe we can bring back massages and all of the things that I aspired towards holding for our team. If I'm thinking about all of those things, it's pretty challenging for me to get into my body and come back into my skin, which is where all of the vision is born from. And so the siloing, I've found a lot of freedom in when I can cut out the other noise, then I can listen into what's soft and what's mine. And so I think that there's importance in removing silos that are creating friction, removing silos where you're no longer operating in community, where there's not flow, when you're not getting input from other people who are important and are invested and are flowing within this too. And then there's where it's important. It's where it allows each of the individuals within this to shine and to be in their particular genius zone as well.
It's great that we're just having this conversation, because that this also, like, it's not cookie cutter. We have to like talk it out in this perspectives to get that rhythm and understand that these are complex things in scale and situation. There's that level of situatedness and complexity that requires collective patience, empathy, and willing to be flexible in that fluctuation of the complexities of life in business. So thank you both so much.
Of course.
Thank you so much for having us, Danelle. This was really such a joy and pleasure, and congratulations on this new adventure of yours.